Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we might make a start there. Thanks so much for coming all the way in. I know we've all had busy days and it's difficult to get here, but we really appreciate your attendance. And we've got 4 speakers today. Thanks Jamie and Kath and Monica and Kathryn, our president, that's juggling speaking and the go-to-meeting.
I might just say too, to start off with, that we have, we're all scattered around. 3 of us are in Brisbane and Kath's partway down to the Gold Coast, and we've prepared this collaboratively online, so we haven't actually had a practice run through of our presentation, but we'll be fine. We'll just wing that. Just to start us off. Okay. So we just thought we'd start with a little introduction into what is TPRS for those who aren't familiar. It stands for Teaching Proficiency Through Reading and Storytelling, although in recent times even that's being reworded a little bit and called story asking rather than storytelling. And, well, I won't read through that if you like, but it's very much about having being in a constant conversation with the students and making sure that that you're using the target language a lot, but that everything that you say is comprehended by the students as you're saying it. And so there are a few techniques that we'll explain that we've been using that demonstrate how that is done in a TPRS class situation. And the content is very personalised, so that leads to higher engagement by the students because they're very connected to exactly what we're talking about. It's not something abstract. It's very connected to what they're interested in at the time. To say it quick as well. And then I've just got a couple of little quotes here from people who've done a lot of research in the field, and certainly if you were looking to do further research of your own into the details of TPRS and the theory behind it, Stephen Krashen is a very good person to... he has a lot of information on the topic, and of course Nina Sparta was one of the speakers at the AFMLTA conference in July, and she's done a lot of research on second language acquisition as well, her research is also very interesting.
Okay, what's TCI?
Oh, so TCI, sorry, is Teaching with Comprehensible Input, and even like comprehensible. I know that Terry Walsh, who's the person who presented the conference that we all attended in January, that Kath's about to tell you about, she now also makes the slight change of saying, rather than comprehensible input, but comprehended input. It's all very well for us to think that what we're saying is comprehensible, but if the students aren't actually comprehending it, then it is not serving its purpose. So making sure that the students have fully understood every thing. Sorry.
Okay. And so it started for me and for our little group when we attended the conference in January. Terry Waltz came out, and there were a couple of other presenters who joined her from the US. And, at that point I'd had my planning all sorted for the year, pretty much. I just attended some other planning days with a different group. And I went along, and on the first day, Terry announced she was going to teach us Hawaiian. And she did. And I'm starting to think, well, yes, okay, I can see this working through her comprehensible input and the teaching through the story asking. And over the 3 days, we did sessions in Spanish and Chinese, and we were truly, Hawaiian, Spanish and Chinese, and we were truly amazed at what we could actually understand and connect with and even come to the point of production with in very short period of time through this process. I remember Lisette Vivold, she was one of the presenters, saying, her quote that caught me was, and she was, I'm not going to say a veteran teacher, but she was a teacher with some experience, and she was saying that this method had changed her life, and I said, I want that too. And so yeah, I fully got caught into it, as we all have. And during the 3 days we practiced questioning skills and circling, which we're going to talk a little bit more about today. And we got a takeaway, not dinner, but some cards to assist us with the circling. And we were also able to set up networks of teachers interested in this, and so it's been an ongoing conversation.
One of them is online with us from Melbourne today.
Yeah. I should say, and we thank Ian for organising the conference.
Look forward to the next one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. This is still on? Yeah, okay. Changes to our classroom. So we've all taken some photos of our classrooms just to highlight some of the changes that we've wanted to make and that we've found effective. We have simple rules. Listen, 2 words of English, click if you can't understand. I'm interested, so we want the kids to be, ooh, ah, at certain moments, and surprise me with some good ideas for our stories. So these are the classroom rules. I've just taken it off the wall today to bring here, and they are particularly applicable for for story asking lessons.
What's the 2 words of English?
So if we're in a story asking, we want their input because we want it to be a student-centered idea. They're allowed to say up to 2 words of English for any, and this is the little secret, you know, this is when I'm looking for their, fishing for their ideas. And so this week I did a Mr. Bean thing, and it was, he didn't want to go to America, and I said why, and they could say up to 2 words of English, but they could use Skinibus or Skijanitis. Yeah, Donald Trump. So often it's just as a name, and then if they start to say 3, I go, no, 1, 2, 3, no, it doesn't count. So 2 words of English. It just tries to keep the English, you know,
and focused, because if they're allowed to, if they can ramble on in English, their ideas will get a little bit too extravagant as well, and we're trying to, and keep to the structures, etc. Sorry, I probably should mention just earlier in the explanation about TPRS, and it would have been up there on the slide, but TPRS is about sheltering vocab, so restricting vocab to just the most frequently used language, but not sheltering grammar. So we don't worry if we need to use different grammatical structures. That's fine. We don't have to just stick to the oh, they're not ready for that yet sort of idea. If it comes up in the flow of conversation, it must be something that we want to use and we need. So we're happy to use that, but we don't want to overwhelm them with a lot of nouns, basically a lot of extra vocab. So that's where that also helps too, because if the children start making suggestions, extravagant suggestions, it's likely going to involve them too much.
And comparing, for me, I used to do a lot of nouns with a smaller number of sentence structures, and now we do a lot of structures and narrowed nouns, and sometimes we're sticking a bit of a cognate word in there, something that's, chocolate, banana. Something that's going to be easy, but so we can keep the flow. Yeah. I'll just use my pointer to demonstrate the fact that and it keeps going. Oh, and Monica and I have got 2 pointers, because this is a very significant change to the classroom. Is we're trying to make the work comprehensible, And you'll see some photos where we have our word walls. Yeah. So this is my classroom, and I use the TPRS for years 4, 5 and 6. I teach prep to 6, but at the moment I'm choosing just to focus 4, 5, 6. And when I'm doing a story asking, I'll have the students sitting in their rows. The desks are all around the perimeter of the room, because if we need to use a desk, then they just need to move the chair to the desk. And these are my Super 7, or the words that I'll be pointing to. And if I'm saying a sentence or asking a question, I'll make sure I'm resting the pointer on the English. So you probably can't see, but the signs are in Romaji and English. And the English is, in most cases, slightly larger and bold. So I'm making sure that they can comprehend what I'm saying in order to make it comprehended input. Yeah.
The point is for them to be understanding the meaning of a word as close in time to when they're hearing the word as possible, and for the meaning to be very accurate. We don't want them misunderstanding. We don't want them to be thinking that just one little example. I do use gestures, and it's not that you can't use gestures in class either, but in the past, when I've used a lot of gestures for teaching, for example, I've taught that when we've been talking about colours, and we've done a little song, you know, with our primary school children and colours, and I've done these wonderful gestures which I love using for the colours, and it's based on Japanese Sign Language, and it has a few cultural connections with Japan, and we have a bit of a chat about that, and that's all lovely. And when we're talking about colours, they immediately understand which colour I'm talking about based on the gestures. And for example, this is aka for red, and they get that straight away. And that's fine. But I have found that when I've gone back and been talking about something else, you know, a few weeks later, a month later, 2 months later, and I might mention aka, and I do this, they start going mouth, lips, what is it? And so they're getting a different meaning, and so I have to be very careful that that doesn't happen, obviously. Whereas by pointing to the English as we're saying the word, we're 100% certain that they're getting the correct meaning of the word as they hear it, so that they're associating the sound of the word with the exact meaning of that word.
And we've got a selection of words which are our commonly used. Terry calls them Super 7, and questioning words, and I've got particles to the side in yellow. But then any other extra words that we're focusing on in the story, I will have on being projected in the middle screen, and I start off with them. I think there's a picture of a classroom of yours, Jane, and so we'll have the Japanese up there, and as the English, as that word comes up in our story, then we'll stop and they'll write the English on the board next to the Japanese. So if they want to, they can look at the Romaji, but actually I don't need them to look at the Romaji. I want them to be looking at the English meaning, and while I'm saying it, yeah.
And the reason that it's not written in script is because that can actually be a bit of a distraction and take their focus away from the English, which is what the Romaji is really just there as a reference, and we don't want them to be distracted by the script and trying to read it or anything like that. We're really wanting them to hear the language as much as possible.
The last point on that previous slide, which we don't need to bring back, is just that I've changed my classroom. I've taken away my pretty posters, and I've got all these functional words up now to make sure that I can have things to be pointing to at my fingertips. Yeah. Oh, a few pretty posters.
Yeah.
Not very many.
Mine are all up there.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question now? Do you want questions at the end?
No, it's okay. You can ask them on that.
So with the Super 7 words,
Big voice.
with they're called Super 7s. Do those things change when you change topics, units, or anything? They're pretty constant. Question words like, you know, nani, itsu.
Well, the Super 7, imas, arimas.
Here's my Super 7, Kath.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Just a little bit tabby, sorry, but yeah, no, they don't change. And question words are separate.
And you make that decision. Are yours the same as yours?
This is
I think so.
Terry's Super 7 and our interpretation of her Super 7.
Okay. Okay.
I
It's in the
it's in the slide.
as well.
Let's have a look at the next slide, maybe. Also move on to. Sorry. Oh yeah. So here's. This is my class. These are the posters on my classroom. All my rules are just slightly different. They're my question words. These are my, Super 7 sort of down here. There's a couple of extra ones in there as well. Sorry, I'm going all over the place with it. Sorry. But anyway. So, and what else do we have?
Your classroom.
So depending on the activity that I'm doing, sometimes I might set that, I often have the class set up in the rows. Sometimes we might go into a semicircle formation. You can see also I've got my desks around the outsides and all the pretty posters are up the back, which I still use, but it gives me a chance to run up the back and point to them up there. Can
I ask what grandma is in the rules?
Yeah, so the grandma rule, which Kath, lucky her, doesn't need, but the grandma rule is when you're asking for suggestions in a story, that they need to be something that is appropriate, that even my grandmother would approve of, and I'm not saying that I have a need for that on a regular basis either, but I have found it a little bit handy. Sometimes the boys get a little bit and I don't mean to talk about boys and girls, but a bit carried away with guns and gets a little bit violent. So I like to be able to say that my grandmother's not really into violence, and use it in that sort of way. It can just bring it. Yeah, we keep it G-rated, and we want to. And it can just sometimes be, if you've got a particular direction that you are trying to guide things in, it can be a way of. It can be a little bit of an excuse to get out of a tricky situation too. That's how I use it. I don't use it on a regular basis, but it's handy to have there for me.
Okay, hi everybody. I just wanted to say too, I kind of fell into the TPRS quite happily. Kathryn and I were chatting, I think the day or two before the conference in January, and she said, "You are coming along, aren't you?" And I missed that. It happens regularly. And she said, "Well, it's not too late. Why don't we try and
we had
get
spoken
you in?"
about TPRS a few years ago too in our collaborative planning as well.
Yes, that's right. So yeah, used to do a lot of planning together when our situations were very similar. So I thought, right, okay, I'll organise the kids. Yes, yep, I'd love to be there. I'm there. So I went along for one day, and that was enough to get me totally inspired. And these ladies, together with them, and having a group that we can bounce ideas with and share our resources has been invaluable as well. So unfortunately, I don't have my own classroom, but I am fortunate enough to teach from Prep to 6. So I do TPRS fairly regularly with grades 3 to 6. So I experimented with Year 3 this year, and I thought, I don't know how they're going to go. They might be too young to concentrate for that time, but they actually did really well. And they still have, I think, quite a deep memory of the concepts that we covered in the story, which incidentally was a story about, we were doing travelling to Japan, so I wanted to talk to them about famous places, and I normally did that unit, but in a different way. So I was able to go in with ideas of how I wanted the story to go, because I'm in charge of the story and they're the helpers, we co-create it. So we had Darth Vader, who wanted to see gold, so he wanted to go to Kinkakuji. So first he went to Tokyo, and there wasn't any Kinkakuji in Tokyo, there wasn't any gold, but there was Tokyo Tower. This all happened in our story. So today, this photo was taken today actually. We did a story about a king, so I had a cute little crown that I just had to use as a prop. And we're starting a mini MasterChef unit. So traditionally, at the end of the culminating activity, what we work towards is the children preparing and showing us a video of themselves in their own kitchen. First of all, introducing themselves and the ingredients, and then doing the step-by-step of the ingredients. So first, mazu, tamanegi o kirimasu, very, very simple language, grade 6. And then having a conversation with the partner about the food that they've created. So 3 steps. We're really short of time. We normally do it over 2 terms. We're doing it over 1. So I'm like, right, we're going to introduce that key vocabulary in a different way. And I thought today we'll try it in a story. And we got through the whole story, and we introduced all of this vocab, and we'll obviously revisit that tomorrow and in ongoing lessons. But basically the king wanted to eat whatever they decided. It was ice cream or Baskin & Robbins or a soft ice cream. And they went to different places, and you know, the first place they went, it was supai, and then the next place they went, it was nigai, oishikunai, it wasn't delicious. And so really lots of beautiful repetitions of that language, that key language that I'm wanting them to acquire. Yeah, so pointing to those key questions there, pointing to the English meanings, and I had a student who was the typist, is that correct? Typist? And they...
Stenographer?
No. So I use OneNote for all my well, not my planning, but for my resource creation. So for each class I go into, I just take my laptop, plug it in, and then the resources I need are on that page. So it seems to work well. So that was on a page without the English meanings. So as Terry suggested, as you start to introduce the words, my little stenographer will enter them in. So I'm not having to do any writing, I can just keep going with the story. I had another student today who was the record keeper of the story. So as we were introducing each line, they were really straining to listen and making sure. Then occasionally I'd say, right, tatte kudasai, stand up please, what have you got so far? And they would self-edit then and go, oh, no, it's not meant to be a wa there, it should be a no. And so it was lovely for them to be able to self-correct as well. I think that's pretty much all for that one. Yes.
And that's my photo of when I was travelling in one school, and a couple of other schools. I occupy a library for Japanese, so I don't get a lot of wall space, so I keep it really compact. And yeah, that one I showed is the signs I generally put up and write the rest on the whiteboard as I'm using them. And my adapted rules this term, I've added a one speaker at a time rule, which is been struggling a little bit with this year. They're all very excited to contribute to the stories. So, yeah.
So we have, these are the different types of techniques that we've had a go at. The story task asking was the method I was just talking about when we create the story together. So if we go back, I might just give, I don't know, if I borrow one of your pointers.
Oh, yes.
I may. Stand it out, thank you. Like a weapon. So we started off with all of these blank, and so the first thing I said was, they already knew otoko-noko from our previous story, meaning boy. So I said, minasan, otoko-noko ga imasu. When I do this, do you do the same? That's when they go, whoa, like it's the most interesting thing they've ever heard. We just pretend. So let's have a try, ready? Otoko-noko ga imasu. Whoa! I know. And then I said, otoko-noko wa o-sama desu. And my little scribe wrote king. Otoko-noko wa
So how does
o-sama
the
desu.
scribe know that it's king? Do you have
Because
to-
I said he's king.
Yeah.
I'm very explicit.
Yeah.
King.
Yeah, okay.
O-sama wa king desu. O-sama wa otoko-noko wa o-sama desu. Then I'd say a question. Otoko-noko wa o-sama desu ka? And they'd say, hai. And I'd say, hai, so desu. Otoko-noko wa o-sama desu. Then we'd introduce a new word. Otoko-noko wa ojo-sama desu ka? Ojo-sama desu ka? And they'd say, iie. And then one of our techniques is that questioning. So desu. Otoko-noko wa ojo-sama janai desu. Otoko-noko wa o-sama desu. Otoko-noko wa ojo-sama janai desu. So you're starting to get that repetition of the different vocabulary. And then we'd introduce, so where does he live? Doko ni sunde imasu ka? Point to my doko. Ojo-sama, o-sama wa doko ni sunde imasu ka? And then we'd have some guesses, some fishing. So they'd suggest the North Pole or New York or in a ditch or wherever, you know, grade 6, yeah. And all sorts. And so you choose the one where you feel a bit of energy. Do you do that too? Where you go, oh yeah, that's the one. And now I try and limit to just 3 suggestions and we'll be there all day. And just to keep the story rolling. Right, yep, that's it, let's keep moving. And then I'll say, okay, what did I just say? So that comprehension and checking for comprehension in English is really important. because the kids might just be sitting there going, I've got no clue what she is saying. And I say to the kids, right, it's my job to make sure you understand. That's my job. It's your job to try to understand. So if you're not understanding and you're trying your best to understand, I need to do something different. You need to let me know that you're not understanding. So by checking that comprehension, they'll say, well, you just said that so-and-so lives in the North Pole. And if they're not quite right, then we can correct that straight away. So then we just continued on with our story, and we got to the end where he got really fat and died.
Oh, and died.
Yeah. Good day in the office. I love that though. Anything silly or, as long as Grandma approves, we bend that a little bit. But yeah, it's really fun. It's really fun. Lots of laughs.
Oh, okay, so I was just going to mention the movie talk. I've enjoyed trying out some of those this year, picking a really interesting YouTube video that has a bit of suspense is my favourite one at the end, but and then something surprises them at the end. So you can narrate any video in any way you want with any language you want that you might be targeting or otherwise, but that's basically the crux of movie talk. So
just using that as a bit of an extra stimulation. And one way to use it, which I saw the idea from what Ian had done, was to have screenshots of some of the scenes in the video clip that you were going to show, and doing a story with the students using that. Sorry, I'm facing the wrong way. So preparing them by talking through it and doing a story together using that, and then showing the video clip at the end. And then by the time you get to the video clip, everyone's thoroughly, we've done all of the language together and they're really comfortable with it, and you can just sit back and watch the video and enjoy it, rather than sometimes with movie talk, some examples that you might see of movie talk on YouTube clips, etc., from teachers in the States teaching Spanish, which is so darn easy. Is any Spanish teachers here with us today? Lucky you. But I know. No languages are easy, but there's just so many similar words. But sometimes the movie talk is showing some examples that you might see online of movie talk is where they show a video clip and pause it and talk about it and do the circling and all of that as you go. But the children tend to get terribly frustrated with that. The video's on, they want to watch it, and they don't want the teacher stopping it halfway along the way. So if you've already, from the teacher's point of view, if you've already got your language input leading up to it and preparing for it, it makes for a much more enjoyable movie watching experience. So there's a few ways that you can do it.
And it's just short. It's a short movie, like it's not...
Oh yeah, the ones I've used are no longer
a couple of minutes.
2 minutes or so, and you screenshot as many as you want and explain as many as you want. The picture helps to connect the meaning for the students.
What else do you do?
Picture talk is
Picture talk is also similar to movie talk. It's just that you're using a photo or something as your stimulus for the conversation. So I've done one where I had a picture, I had a PowerPoint slide that I prepared with three, I have shared this with a few people, but I had 3 doors, and we just had a conversation with the students. I put the doors up there, these, very different looking, interesting looking doors, and we talked about what might be on the other side of those doors, and then I'd ask the class, which one do you want to open? We've got door 1, door 2, door 3, we're doing all of this obviously in the target language, and on the other side of the door, do you think it's summer, do you think it's winter? That's just all language that I was wanting to use, and you could talk about who do you think's on the other side of the door, or what country do you think, all sorts of things. And then I just set up my PowerPoint so that when I clicked on whichever door, it jumped to a particular slide, and then in that slide there'd be another picture, and we might talk about. So on the other side of one slide, it was an ice skating rink, and it was a snowy scene, and people were ice skating. So then we create a story of who are these people ice skating, why are they ice skating, blah blah blah. Are they friends? Are they family? Blah, whatever you might want to talk about there. Another one was these 2 girls out on boat on a lake, and so we started creating stories about these girls. Why are they on the lake? One looked happy, one looked a bit nervous. Why might she be nervous? Oh, that island in the background is actually a monster. It's coming to eat them. They're trying to get away. You know, we're creating all of these stories, and it was very obviously interesting for children. And it was very fun. So that's picture talk. It's just what you're using as your stimulus to generate that conversation with the children. One word images.
Go to
Yep.
further screen.
Yep.
Sorry.
This is the free write, so we did have some pictures of the one-word images. So it must be...
That's next one.
Well, I've only just done this recently. This is a year 4, and Kathryn and Monica, and Jane, had you done this? Or yeah, had done these, and I heard about them in the holidays, and so I did it first week back. I was doing a unit of Magical Pet with year 4s, and we had already read a bit of a story at the end of last term, which was written in script, and came back from holidays, and I wanted to revisit that language, so it worked out absolutely perfectly. And I got the class to, you know, we pulled the student out to the front, and I had them sit here, and we pretended that was our pet. And we had I had two kids chosen to do illustrating, and the class, I don't know if this is how you guys have done it, and the class just came up with words in Japanese for our, let me see, Donna Atama ga arimasu ka, neko, okay, or this one's sakana, maybe, tori, sakana no atama, but whatever they came up with, the drawers had to be drawing and creating as we went through, just building up a fushigina pet, a magical pet. And that was just one that the kids did that I thought was quite cute. Some of them were, you know, there were only 2
illustrators are not showing the class, right, what they're doing
no,
until the end?
No, not till the end, yes, yeah. And then we name them the person who's sitting at the front. They've got a few little head pats along the line. Or kawaii, kawaii desu ka, kawaii desu ka. Oh, kawaii desu.
Cute or are you scary?
Yes.
Non-Japanese.
Yeah. So, yeah, so the kids were giving me input to create that little illustration. It was just a great way of revisiting the language and being comprehensible and being all in target language.
We've got some other ones
the
that
next
use
one.
examples, don't we?
And these are just some that we've done in class. So we used it as a way of creating a character that we could then use to make a story about. And so the point with this is that we take some inanimate object and we turn it into a character, and we give it a personality, and we give it features like big eyes, or you know, short hands and short legs, and different things like that. And then so we did, my year 6s did this character creation last term, and now we're using those characters in the stories that we're creating this term. So again, it's got all of that personal connection for them because they're their own characters. So today I showed them, you know, flipped through a few of the pictures of the characters that my students had created of their own, and then we chose which one we were going to make a story about. And yeah, and they voted on which one to go with, so they were happy with it. But I know that some of the examples with other people, things I've seen online, is to have your class create their own characters and then show those to a different class or a different year level and get them to vote on the best one and take that one. So it's sort of, because sometimes if you have the same class voting on their own pictures, it goes with friendship groups and things like that. So anyway, that's they're all things to think about. You know, going forward, we're all still, if it isn't obvious enough, you know, this is our year of experimentation with what we picked up in January, and this is not by any means, and Ian might be sitting there going, oh my goodness. But you know, it's not fully TPRS absolutely what we're doing, but we're just trying to build our skills. It's quite a, whilst it's got a lot of skills that are, even if you aren't going to go fully TPRS, there are a lot of skills in it that I think would be useful to any language teacher anywhere, and there's certainly the potential to take it a long way, and we're just working towards that. But yeah. But we don't want to. I think we've really given it a good go this year, and whilst, you know, sometimes because we've had that network and talking to each other, etc., bounced ideas off each other. And whereas if we'd been on our own in the past, which is how I was a few years ago when I was just doing a bit of online research of my own, didn't have anyone else to bounce ideas off. And there wasn't a lot for our scripted languages either. All of the information in the States is more around Spanish and French and other languages. You know, when I struggled, I didn't have anyone to turn to or anywhere to go to find. That's not that sad. But you know, you tend to then just think, oh well, maybe it's not for me or something like that. Whereas, you know, we've just been able to bounce so many ideas off each other. We're constantly going, oh, here we are in the holidays. Oh, try that. And
word image. Yes, I'll do that.
And because our focus is on these Super 7, these really highly frequently used words, and we're seeing how many different ways we can apply those to different settings and different contexts, yeah, you can really experiment with a lot of different things, and it's been a very interesting experience.
I just wanted to comment too, I touched on it before, but how important it is, or is in my situation, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. So I'd spent many hours creating program for my school because we started from prep to 6, and I didn't want to throw all of that hard work away. So I think what we were doing was still very valuable, but what I've wanted to improve on and work on this year was the increase of comprehensible input. So by using units that I already had established and tweaking them and introducing them in a different way, I think that's the way that I've generally been doing it. A couple of different units were independent of any other context, but generally that's the way I'm moving forward, and I think, yeah, that seems to be working quite well, and kids seem to enjoy it.
Should we go back to the techniques? Or,
yeah, you've got another illustrated class stories, I think, on the next slide. Was that before? Yeah.
So what's the role of the script then? So we're talking about Japanese. So what's
where does the script come in?
So perhaps if we went to the free write, and then that will step to. Okay, so if we go back, so this is one of the techniques that Terry introduced us to. There were two, one under the other on the previous slide, was dictation and free write. So I use dictation as a lead up to doing a free write, and a free write is like a brain dump, and this is where, but I'll get to that in a minute. The dictation I use as an opportunity to read the selection of sentences, which has been my focus sentences for the unit/story, and read that to the students, and they have to listen and write it in Romaji, not in script at this point. They write it in Romaji, and then they have to, the way I do it is I get them to also write a translation down, and they check their spelling and they check their translations. For me, I think that's when they check their when they check their spelling, they have to make sure they have the correct sentence written down in their book or on the page. And for me, that's a good modelling of the full sentence, because the rest of the time up to there is not written. It's all oral. It's input and a little bit of almost just one word or two words of English, or quick responses in the classroom, not necessarily sentences. So for me, the dictation is a good way of modelling. And then I've only done 2 free writes. I'm coming up to my 3rd free write this year, soon in the next 2 weeks. This boy was new to Japanese this year in Year 6, and this was his first free write. I think I gave them 10 minutes, 7 minutes or 10 minutes, I can't remember now. And they're not allowed to, actually for the first one, I let them look, because they were all a bit spooked, I let them look at the words that are on the wall, and I tried to insist that they were just listening to the Japanese voice in their head. How does it sound? How does it sound? And gave them 10 minutes to write whatever they could. That was a pretty good demonstration. And then this was his 2nd free write at the end of term 2. It's got a lot more language. It was a different story, a different focus. And same thing, 10 minutes, but that time I covered everything up and they weren't allowed any hints in the classroom, so they had to rely on their voice totally. And that's in Romaji because I don't want to slow him down. I don't want him to be worried about writing inheritance. I want to see what he can say. And then I had the time at that point to then let whoever wanted to actually, do a voice recording, an oral recording on Flipgrid. So now we've got that recording. And actually we had already done a reading of, we call it a cold character reading. Now these guys did study hiragana. I did the hiragana in year 5 and I found that that has helped doing the cold character reading. So the cold character reading is where then we're doing a whole lot more kanji with the kids. A lot of kanji. And the kanji is fantastic. Not for writing, but for recognition. And yeah, where are we up to with this? So that's our free write.
So we just had some example class stories, so that was just things that came out of creating stories together. So there was examples you might have seen previously, but I published some of those and we use that as reading material, and then doing some free reading. They might choose a class story or some other books I've got in the class, but yeah. Where are we heading to? So
It's a great idea. I've done that.
Yeah,
record those stories.
I wouldn't recommend doing it for every class like I did.
Even just putting them in clear plastic, display folders instead of laminating, and then they can have it.
And that's what I felt, that's what I might have done with the Flipgrid if I'd had more time. At the time I'm thinking, I'm going to get the kids to go on and listen to other kids' stories, but then it was end of term and we went on to something else. This is an example of a story that we did as a cold character reading. And originally we did it with slides with some pictures on it. Some of the slides didn't have pictures, but you can see there's a lot of kanji in there. And we've tried to use clues like something like Bondi Beach, and probably use the word shark in there, but focus was on using adjectives and using shitai desu and shitakunai desu, and that's a full story that we looked at through a PowerPoint in script, exactly like this. And then after the reading, then printed it out onto plain like this, onto an A4 page with no pictures, and got the kids to do what we call volleyball reading, which is just it's pair reading, where one person reads, the other person translates, then they read, and back to this person translating and then reading. We did that actually at the conference in Spanish. Did you guys do it in Spanish too? Yeah. And I've done it today just with a different story. This was already in the slideshow, but I've done it today with Year 6s with our Mr. Bean story, which we did on Tuesday, and today we've done a volleyball reading, and it's amazing. It's really
because they've got the language in their head, and I think it's quite deep. They can kind of predict, so they don't even have to actually fully be able to read every character, but they can kind of predict what that word must be, and then that's sight reading really. That's kind of how it starts to happen.
So the idea is that any language in your story has to have had a lot of repetition so that it is ready for them to access. And it's almost like a presumed, that it's got to be that.
And it's about focusing on those structures rather than all of that extra vocab, which might be different for different people.
A lot of grammar.
So a lot of kanji too, and a lot of repeated English words too. So they're like little gifts. Have that word for free. Yeah, that's right.
Oh yeah, the jobs and things, Kath?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's excellent. We love it.
Well, I have got a few little jobs that we have to keep a record of because everyone wants a job all the time, every single lesson. So we need, and then I'm fine for about 2 lessons, then I can't remember. Of course, I teach 9 classes to do this. So every class has got a little notebook, and I just have that at the front of the classroom, and we choose by random pick a manager for the term that they can accept or not. And then the manager gets to write the details down, and they write down anyone who gets a job in that lesson or that time. And they also write the details of the story that we're doing in English, so that we've got a record of that. Some of the jobs that we do in my class, besides manager, they love doing the repetition clickers. So I had 2 stolen, 1 came back. They love the clicking job, and I get them to click the number of repetitions, and it's great for me too, because at the end of the lesson I think I'm going to have had a focus on using adjectives, and I've only used 3 adjectives. And I thought, well, next time I'm going to make sure that I'm making sure that I use those that I need to use, and we add up, and they have to report to the manager what their number was, and we love it if it's 60.
Can you give an example of what they're clicking on? Like, is it a word?
Words. Now, I have generalised a little bit, so I want to make sure I'm asking questions enough in the class too, using a whole variety of question words that I never used to use. Who, what, where, why. And so the last time we did it with this story, I got one of the clickers was always doing questions, any question. So any time I'm pointing to any of the questions or anything that ends in "ka," which makes it a question too, they were clicking those to see the repetitions of the number of questions, and any of our verbs that we were focusing on. So it was basically a question, verb, and the others were the other focuses, which might have been adjectives, depending on what that was in the lesson. And then they would report their number at the end. So they love doing the clicker duty. And we've also then, the last time, I only did this with the last story with Year 5s, chose a student each lesson to illustrate when we're doing our story asking, creating a story, it takes a couple of lessons. And so I would get one person to illustrate what we did that lesson, and then I've made them into PowerPoint. So at the end of our class story, we go and we look at that and review everything before we go on to the character reading story. That's my little bit there, Kathryn.
Yeah, I was just, I've had this, throughout this year, I've had lots of different native speakers coming into the classroom for short periods, helping me out as assistants. And I wanted to be able to make sure we could still maintain this style of teaching, which I knew was going to be unfamiliar to them. But something that I tried early on in the year was to put up some just regular self-introduction type language so that we could get to know the assistant, but do it using this style. So I put up things like, likes, doesn't like, age, and lives here, or family members, mum, dad, brother. I just did the siblings, older brother, older sister, younger brother, younger sister. And it was very easy to, in one lesson, it was very easy for them to get the hang of what I was trying to do. So as they would say the words, I was pointing to the English so that they saw that. Once they'd done it, with me, any lucky assistant who comes to me gets to do the same lesson probably 15 times. Yeah, it's great. And, well, honestly, really 24. But anyway, depending. And they get the hang of it. So then they... but, eventually, and then I explained to them, obviously, too, that we're pointing to the English, as we say it, and all of that. But, and so it was just a really good way to engage with the children, and so I got my assistants to make a statement about themselves. So, for example, one of my assistants earlier this year, a university student, he said, sushi ga suki janai desu, which means I don't like sushi. And my class had to decide, in Japan, for a true and false, they'll do a circle or a cross, a maru or a batsu. And the class, everyone gets to decide whether they think that the statement that was made was true or false. And of course nobody can comprehend that a Japanese person wouldn't like sushi, so everyone's going, oh yeah, there's no way that's true. And it was fantastic. The shock on their faces. But engaged the children, they all got to listen and comprehend, it's all about their listening comprehension, and they were listening and they were understanding, and it was interesting because we were getting to know the assistant. The assistant was speaking completely in Japanese to them, they were hearing different people speaking, you know. I think it just had so many merits. So I've been able to, and then by the end, once we'd had lots of questions, I had actually 2 assistants at the same time that time, so they were both firing questions, not questions, but statements at the students. By the time they'd heard a lot, and we've got all that vocab up on the board, I said, does anyone want to have a go at posing a statement to the assistants? And I said, you know, the rest of the class isn't allowed to answer because you probably know enough about each other to do that. So you probably know who's got older brothers and older sisters and all the rest of it. But they loved having a go then at making up their own statements for the assistants to check. And I've also just this term had some new students arrive in my classes, so we used that as a good way to get to know our new student in the class, and that was fun as well. So, and it was, yeah, and my new students to the class, we've got these twins who just arrived from Scotland, and another student who, he studied a different language wherever he'd come from, and yeah, they got to sit up on a stool in front of the class and be the focus of attention, and all they had to be able to say really was yes and no in Japanese, but they were getting the hang of that, and it was great, you know, really engaged them straight away. So things like that, just always looking for ways that we can still use these techniques in whatever situation throws itself at us in a primary school classroom.
Do we have a picture of the storyboard?
I don't think so.
Okay. So
I'll go. I think I back.
Sorry. Trying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So storyboard creation, I'm sure we know what a storyboard is, basically like a little cartoon. So, for example, we've introduced the story today about the king who wanted to eat certain objects. So next time we could say, okay, let's do a quick storyboard of that. So they would quickly draw up 6 squares, draw a quick little stick figure picture in each one, and then write the language, and whether it's just individual words at this stage, if that's all they can do, that's fine, or whether they can start to put sentences together, and then you can see how much they've actually acquired. Go, oh, they're not doing those particles very well, we need to really focus on that, and sort of steers your teaching back to what is needed. The group sentence construction too is once you get to the stage of them recognising the kanji and the script of the story, which we'll show later on. We've probably done this sort of activity as well, but each group gets a pack with the words from the sentence cut up, and they have to put it together as a group. Once they've got a sentence from the story together, I check it, and then we swap and they do another sentence from the story. So it's just a quick little activity with recognising the script. The end.
Keep going here, or
Oh, sorry, me. Just me.
Well, it's no particular name.
Okay, yeah. That'd be typical. That's what happens when we half prepare. So, yeah, the student outcomes that we've seen are, you know, what we've got here. But as you saw from the video clip before of Kath's student who's just new to Japanese this year, because they're hearing the language so much, their pronunciation has generally been good. Their comprehension has been great. There've been little examples of just spontaneous use of the language. I had one example in class where I had my Year 6 class, and an announcement came over the PA system of, you know, could such and such a student please come to the office or whatever, and it was somebody from the lower grades that I don't teach and have no idea who they were, and this girl just called out, "Tare desu ka? Who's that?" And it was just so beautiful and spontaneous and just right in the moment, you know. Yeah, sort of. I mean, you know, it was just lovely, and you know, those sorts of things really blow you away.
Can I just add, I have a Year 6 boy with intellectual impairment, and he's working at Year 3 Maths and English level, and he would be one of my best listeners with this technique. It's just worked beautifully with him, and he was on a D in Japanese last year, and didn't have Japanese so that he could get extra support in English and Maths last year as well. And this year, his listening has just been fantastic, and he was one of mine that finished one of my sentences. So, you know, I just said the word love, and he finished, I want love in Japanese. So he said that he was one of my first students to kind of come out with the spontaneous output, you know, and it was just, really great to see that one.
Much less photocopying, I think,
yes,
you guys.
definitely.
Hardly been photocopying, there's no worksheets.
And virtually no bookwork, very occasional.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything more comment here? Let's go on to questions, I think.
Yeah, I think, I mean, no, I don't need to talk about that. I mean, they're just, we've talked about all those ideas, I think, creating stories, dictation, writing.
Yeah, we still use some, you know, a little bit of Quizlet Live and some Kahoot and stuff as it...
I do, yeah. I know we did ask Terry the question in January about Quizlet, and really, hardline answer is it's not really, I mean, it's not got a place, but you know, we teach young kids, and I find that they really enjoy those
even just as like
game
brain
ideas.
breaks in a way,
yeah.
but it's not really a brain break because they're having to concentrate.
Well, I'll always have the Quizlet set of the vocab that's in our story, and you know, I find that it's useful.
And the Kahoot jumble is really good for putting sentences together from the story, and when I've done that, I've had them work it with a partner, not do it on their own, but work with a pair, so then you hear them reading out the story and working out what sounds right. So it's again just getting that reinforcement of what sounds right in their head. So that's lost sound. Why is that? Sorry, online person has lost sound. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hello. I keep going.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, I'm just taking the check.
Oh, sorry, I'll go back.
What's quiz brain?
Oh, quiz brain. That's just a little vocab reading exercise activity that I do with them, where we might be reading a word and have a vocab. Everyone gets a vocab card, and you and it has the word on one side and the meaning on the other. And you go up to somebody else, and you have to read their word. They read your word, and you have to say that. And then, if I might be just doing it for reading practice, where they don't even necessarily know the meaning of the word, and so then you would tell your partner, and after you read each other's cards, you trade.
Oh, sorry, Kathryn.
It's all right, I caught it. And then you go and quiz with somebody else. So it's just a little 5-minute
very fast
reading practice that we do.
I use 4-minute.
Yeah,
4-minute quiz trade, and you can go through the whole vocab
again,
and the kids can go around the whole class.
Yeah, and it's not it's not a TPRS technique as such anyway.
That's exactly what Quizlet does.
Yeah,
but
it's fast.
It's physical.
And they're on their feet.
Yeah.
They're moving around. Yeah.
Back on. Good. Okay. Yeah. And so this is just the you know, looking at the Australian curriculum and looking at how. So this was the blue is.
So the bolded parts of what we believe could be covered with TPRS. The blue just happens to be, I think, one from one of my units where I focused on listening and reading comprehension. So that was.
I mean, I think everything could be covered with TPRS, but we're just, in my case, I only teach the upper school, so I can't manage, you know, all of the details of everything. But
bearing in mind it goes from prep to year 6. That's where many of us aren't.
That's right. Yeah, Monica was just looking at that blue is just a particular unit that she was doing, and that's the areas that particular unit has addressed. So it's not that, I mean, I think that, and as Jane sort of said, still taking what we were doing before, but just approaching it in a different way. It's not that the
practice rather than the content.
And
in fact, I think it's a way of meeting the Australian curriculum better than what I was doing before.
So, does anyone have any questions? And even online people, if we're looking for the messages on the chat screen, but if you want to put your vocab up, if you wanted to put your mic on, you're welcome to. Does anyone have? And Ian, of course, can answer with